The new episode is here, and it begins, as many assumed, with Pomni's dream in which she sees herself as an abstracted monster. And upon awakening, Ragatha knocks on her door and tells her that Cain has already thought of something, and a few seconds later we see Cain presenting a new adventure: Candy Carrier Chaos to the residents. And only then we learn that the main problem was the theft of the very same wedge syrup from the trailer. And soon we learn that Gummigoo and his gang are actually the villains who stole the syrup. And then we're shown Zooble, who, as in the last episode, refused to go on the adventure. And despite all of Cain's entreaties and the hope that Zooble will agree to participate under the pretext that the new adventure will involve an AI that is 57 times smarter than Gloinks, Zooble still refuses. And then Cain realizes that the other characters may be hesitant to take part in the new adventure. So he hurriedly sends everyone else to Candy Canyon Kingdom. And after that, we are shown all the delights of Candy Kingdom, and these jelly worms are very much reminiscent of the characters from the game Slither.io. And at the entrance to Candy Kingdom, we see a sign warning about the threat from Fudge Monster and urging not to let him near the city. We are then shown how excited all the NPCs are about the arrival of our characters and how brightly they greet them. And while Ragatha is admiring the castle, one of the dummies pushes Gangle, then her comedy mask breaks again. And all this happened because of Princess Lulilalu, who calls Cain her god. Then, as I told you before, we see Ragatha and Princess Lulilalu become friends, and the princess also manages to praise Ragatha's manners. Princess Lulilalu informs us that Gummigoo and his gang left in a modified candy truck, and to save the maple syrup, they need something similar, and then we see the second truck. After all this, Princess Lulilalu gives the key to the kingdom, which, if it falls into the wrong hands, can destroy the city where Lu lives, because she asked to call herself that. At first, Jax showed his character again and decided to drive the truck himself, but he didn't like the horn and didn't think of anything smarter than to put Gangle behind the wheel, who became sad again. And after our friends went in search of the Gummigoo and eventually found their lair, Jax decided to send Pomni to save the maple syrup they needed to save their village. And this shot reminded me of something. And apparently Pomni couldn't help herself and landed right on top of the alligator truck. Then Gummigoo decided to make a genius move and swerved onto a road full of rocks, however, thereby setting up one of his partners who was recently hit by Jax. As I said in the previous videos, Jax decided that he was the boss and ordered Gangle to turn off the highway and go in pursuit of Gummigoo's truck. And of course, this could not go quietly, and the result we saw on the example of Kinger. And realizing that there is nothing else left, Jax decided to ram the alligator truck. And now, not only Gangle suffers at the hands of Jax, but also Ragatha. And then Jax went to blackmail and promised to tell Ragatha about some figurine if Gangle doesn't fulfill his conditions. And apparently, this figurine is very important for Gangle if in the next scene we see Gangle ramming a neighboring truck. After the first attempt to kill Pomni, she stayed alive. When using the secret weapon, Pomni was on the verge of death. But the way to help Pomni from our old friend Kinger was unsuccessful, but one of the spikes pierced Ragatha's chest. But in the end, the truck with the circus residents fell into the chocolate river where lives, you know who lives there. But the truck with alligators and Pomni started to glitch and fell through the textures, which caused Gummigoo to fall into a kind of dungeon, which in the pilot episode could be a secret room. After many minutes and possibly hours of searching for something, Gummigoo finds a location where all the sources of all the characters and main faces of Candy Kingdom are located. He also meets a copy of himself, which makes him extremely afraid. And then we realize that the very frame that has been causing a lot of questions is Gummigoo's twitching eye. And then Pomni gets to him, and during their conversation, they get the idea that they are all under the map, and Gummigoo asks the logical question why Pomni's squad isn't here. And after Pomni suggests that it's probably because they're not NPCs, we realize that this place was perfectly made just to entertain the inhabitants of the circus, and in that case, Cain is really trying for his wards. And remember how Gummigoo in one of the fragments mentioned his mom, who he doesn't see here, and also in his head a huge number of questions about who he is and what is going on here. And I have a hunch that Gummigoo has no village and even less of a mom, and all this was made up to create an illusion of the past for all the inhabitants of the Candy Kingdom. But what's more important is that we see the fudge monster source. And then from under the chocolate river, all the characters pop up, and Jax mentions one of the characters from the famous movie, namely Augustus Gloop, who loved chocolate, but that's not the point. And after that, the great and terrible fudge monster pops up in front of the circus inhabitants, who can't believe his luck that someone got to him, and apparently his only goal is to eat our characters. However, after a couple of seconds, everything changes and we realize that Cain has thought everything through, and even such a moment as the greatest danger was foreseen. And the mere phrase that our characters are not made of candy has caused Fudge Monster great disappointment, because he can't eat anything that isn't made of candy. Kinger gives us a reference to the pilot episode and tells us that Pomni missed meeting the horrible monster again. Fudge then tells us his story, and we learn that he wasn't always so bloodthirsty and even lived with the others in Candy City. However, after Princess Lou kicked him out, he decided to take revenge and ate a huge number of people from that very town. And we realize that, according to Jax, eating a character is not murder. And this fact caused Ragatha to ask a lot of questions. And Jax decides on a very strange, but at the same time ingenious act: to exchange the key to the kingdom for help in finding robbers' alligators, who literally in a second got into the location in which they were waiting for them. After that, we see a long scene in which Pomni and Gummigoo talk about the meaning of their lives, their problems, the future, and all that sort of thing. Then we find out that Pomni still remembers that she is inside the game, because she directly tells us that the digital circus is not her home. She also invites Gummigoo to the amazing digital circus. And after a million touching words, Gummigoo agrees, and as we realize, the two are now friends. And Pomni figures out a way for them to get out of the dungeon, and it works out in the end. During the conversation between Kinger and Ragatha, we realize that Kinger knows that Cain will never let the circus residents die, so this is not his first adventure, and he may have been on the verge of dying before, but Cain has always saved him. And as a happy coincidence, the truck with Pomni and Gummigoo landed exactly where the other characters were floating. Then we see a reference scene from the pilot episode, and we realize that Pomni has obvious vestibular problems. Then there was a lot of stuff, but the main thing we realize is that Jax is very disappointed because his main friend in the second episode died, and our rabbit will not see anything interesting again. After Pomni informs everyone that Gummigoo is now their new friend who will go with them to the digital circus. And while saying goodbye to Candy Kingdom, Jax decided to add a little fun to his life and left the gates of the city open, and apparently Fudge survived and returned to the kingdom to avenge all his wrongs. And after Gummigoo got into the digital circus, that could have been the end of it, but Cain decided to take away Pomni's last hope and simply removed him from the digital circus, much to Pomni's dismay. And now Pomni's craziness is getting worse. And the episode ends with a scene of eulogy for Kaufmo, which was the most painful for Ragatha. And I think it's obvious to everyone that this episode was dedicated to Pomni, and we finally got to see all her human qualities. What do you think? Well, that's it, and see you soon in more videos. This episode was really epic.